Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. And you have voted and spoken, and so today we begin a new book, Legends of the Rhine by Wilhelm Ruland. And as I said, I've read a few of these stories already, but I'm going to reread them as we travel through this book from beginning to end. Legends of the Rhine travels down the Rhine, visiting different places in Germany and telling stories from there. One thing that I've not done yet in this book is read the prefatory notes by Dr. Ruland himself. And so today we have the prefatory note and the first story, The Petrified Alp. This is Legends of the Rhine. Last year I made the journey between Mainz and Bonn on one of our splendid Rhine steamers. Our vessel glided along like a great water bird. On the shore rose mountains, castles, and ruins, and all over the sun shined brightly from a blue August sky. It was 12 years since I had visited the scenes of my youth, and every Rhinelander will understand with what pleasure I saw again those smiling landscapes arrayed in their summer beauty. Wandering back to my deck chair, I soon became absorbed in the ever-changing panorama. Then the sound of a melodious female voice speaking English fell on my ears. I looked around. A girl was bending over a book and entertaining her father and mother by reading something of special interest and beauty. I listened, and recognized some of my own sentences rendered into the speech of Shakespeare. These three were learning to feel the charms of the Lorelei legend as I had felt it. I confess, my pulse beat quicker as I heard my poor endeavors highly praised, and I could not refrain from advancing and thanking the young reader for her kindly appreciation of my endeavors. She seemed delighted when she discovered that I was the author, and rose to greet me in the most amiable manner. I complimented the travelers that during the past century the Rhine had become the home of romance for the English-speaking nations, the same as Italy for the Germans. The girls smiled and remarked that I must pay that compliment to her mother in particular, as she was by birth an Englishwoman. But the head of the family hastened to add that among Americans, whom he might speak for, the enthusiasm for the beauties of the Rhine was not less than among their Anglo-Saxon cousins. These two nations, which are bound by so many ties to each other and to ourselves, were thus represented before me. The English-speaking people undoubtedly form by far the largest contingent of our Rhine travelers, and it was pleasant indeed to receive so fine a testimonial to the beauties of my birthplace. We had a most interesting conversation, and I was not a little moved as I observed that these foreigners who had traveled over half the world and had seen the grandeur of Switzerland and the charms of Italy should have such an unaffected admiration for our grand old river. I am rather sorry for those who neglect the Rhine. Aren't Lohengrin and Siegfried, immortalized by the great master of Bayreuth, also heroic figures in your Rhine legends? Remarked the young Anglo-American enthusiastically. It was the first time I had seriously thought of this. I was indeed touched, and my thoughts travelled back to the days of long, long ago, when as a chap in my native Bonn, I had first listened with interest to the charming voices of the golden-haired daughters of old Albion, who came in large numbers to reside in the famous Beethoven town. As I separated from my friends at the foot of the Drachsels, I gave them a small present to keep as a memento of the Rhine and one of its poets. München, May 1906. Dr. Wilhelm Ruland. And this is the Petrified Alp. In the region where the Rhine has its source there towered in ancient times a green Alp. This Alp belonged to an honest peasant, and along with a neat little house in the valley below formed his only possession. The man died suddenly and was deeply mourned by his wife and child. Some days after, an unexpected visitor was announced to the widow. He was a man who had much pasture land up in that region, but for a long time his one desire had been to possess the Alp of his neighbor, now deceased, as by it his property would be rounded off to his satisfaction. Quickly making his resolution, he declared to the dismayed woman that the Alp belonged to him. Her husband had secretly pledged it to him in return for a loan after the bad harvest of the previous year. When the widow angrily accused him of being a liar, the man produced a promissory note, spread it out, and with a hard laugh, showed her his statement was confirmed in black and white. The distressed woman burst into tears, and declared it was impossible that her late husband should have made a secret transaction of such a nature. The Alp was the sole inheritance of their son, and never would she willingly surrender it. "I will pay you the compensation for the renunciation of your claim, although nothing obliges me to do so," declared the visitor with apparent compassion, in the meantime producing his purse. The weeping woman mentioned to him to put back his gold and told him to go, which he did. 3 days later, the widow was summoned before the judge. There, the neighbor produced his document and repeated his demand for the possession of the disputed Alp. The judge, who was shamefully bribed, declared the document valid and awarded the Alp to the pursuer. The broken-hearted widow staggered home. The new possessor of the Alp, on the other hand, hastened up to the mountains at full gallop. The man could no longer master his impatience to see for the first time as his legally recognized property the pasture land he had acquired by deceit. There, for 3 days, a storm had raged uninterruptedly. As quickly as the soaked ways would permit, he ascended to the high country. Having arrived, he stared around with horrified eyes and fell in a swoon to the earth, overcome with consternation. Upon the soft green Alp an unseen hand had rolled a mountain of ice. Of the possession which the unjust judge had assigned to him nothing was now to be seen. His own pastures, too, which adjoined, were covered with snow and ice, whilst the meadows of the other Alpsmen below lay spread out in the morning light like a velvet carpet. Towards noon a broken man rode home into the valley, cursing himself and the wicked magistrate who had consented to such an evil transaction. The people there, however, said to each other, "The Frondfasten Mutterlei, the little mother of the Ember Weeks, Frau Slaga, passed over our valley last night with her train of maidens. Over the house of that greedy rich man the ghostly company stopped, and by that it is fixed which one must die in the course of the year." And so it happened. Up there, where the youthful Rhine rushes down through deep rocky chasms, the Petrified Alp stands to this day, a silent warning from bygone days. And that is the Petrified Alp, the very first story from Legends of the Rhine by Wilhelm Reuland. And while I've read this tale before, I still really enjoy it. I love a good tale where a trickster gets his comeuppance, and my goodness, that sure does happen here, doesn't it? This is Dan Scholz for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.